Hello and welcome to Worlds Apart. In the era when whole countries are convicted in the court of public opinion, when massacres are carried out to be shown on TV, and where perception and reality are just as mixed as news and commentary, is there still a place for journalism, let alone ethical journalism? Well, to discuss that, I'm now joined by Aidan White, director of the Ethical Journalism Network. Mr. White, thank you very much for being here.
Hello, yes, it's a pleasure.
Now, you define journalism in terms of 5 basic elements: truth, independence, impartiality, humanity, and humility. And those are very subjective categories. They are all essentially in the eye of the beholder, starting from truth. What could be more divisive and complicated than that? So I wonder whether your definition of journalism essentially reduces a journalist to somebody whose notions of truth, impartiality, independence are very similar to yours.
No, I mean, I think that's wrong, actually. I mean, I'm not just talking here about journalists. I think we're talking about the framework in which everybody behaves. Look, all human beings are ethical animals, and when we have a discourse between us, I mean, it's reasonable that we expect each other to be ethical. Yeah, and the basic constituents of what you might call ethical journalism are, okay, I agree with you, truth is a very big word, but I think accuracy is extremely important. We shouldn't be deceptive in our handling of the facts. Independence, that we are not acting as propagandists for one particular side. And accountability, that we're ready to engage with the audience and to correct our errors.
But let's consider all those very important notions in detail. And I suggest we consider the conflict in Ukraine, which I know you recently wrote about, and there are at least 3 distinct narratives as far as Ukrainian coverage is concerned: Russian, Ukrainian, and Western. In the article that you wrote recently, you perhaps unsurprisingly described the Russian and Ukrainian line as political propaganda, but I came away with an impression that you believe that the reporting in Western media does raise to the standard of journalism. Aren't you being a bit biased towards your Western colleagues?
I mean, I think you're quite wrong here. I mean, if you look at my record, when I was the General Secretary of the International Federation of Journalists, now I'm the Director of the Ethical Journalism Network, I have been consistently against any group, any political group, from any ideological community, from any part of the world, that have sought to try to control information in a way which is propagandistic or unethical, or to incite hate speech, or to distort information. I've been very critical of Western media many times in the past, and what we're talking about here is not a particular block of opinion, whether it's Western, Northern, Southern or Eastern at all. We're talking about the need for people in the public domain to be able to trust the information that they're receiving. Now, I mean, I think it's important to bear this in mind. At the best of times, information and journalists can be subject to pressure from politicians. But when the bullets start flying, when there's a real conflict that breaks out, such as we see in the Middle East at the moment, such as we've had in Ukraine and Crimea, then of course you're going to have much more governmental and political pressure.
But Mr. White, I'm not talking about governmental or political pressure, explicit pressure. Obviously, we can all identify it. But I'm talking about, you know, journalism at its very core is an act of filtering information, and the way that filter is set up depends on your cultural, your historic, personal, gender experiences, and you know, some of that process is subconscious.
I'm sorry, I have to challenge that. The way that journalism works is actually according to sort of universal principles. The fact of the matter is, journalism is safely put under the umbrella of freedom of expression and opinion. This isn't subject to a sort of particular cultural value or not. It's actually defined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All of the countries of the world have signed up to these principles.
But,
one of them is freedom of expression
Mr. White,
and opinion.
all the countries may sign up to whatever principle, but there is the very extensive field of psychology, which I think conclusively shows that we all have our own biases. And some of those biases are conscious, some of those biases are unconscious. So I wonder if claiming impartiality is a form of deception in and of itself.
No, I mean, I think you're wrong here. I think we can make distinctions about quality of information, and we have to. There is a clear distinction between information which may be politically biased in favour of one side or another. And actually, that is quite a common phenomenon, and I'm not against that at all. I think it's perfectly natural. It's human. It's part of the human community. There's a distinction between that form of bias and open propaganda, distortion of information, demonizing the enemy, deceptive handling of the facts, deliberate deliberate incitement to violence and to intense hatred. There's a real distinction here between political bias and distortion and propaganda in the use of information. And you have to, I think, recognise that there are certain universal principles in the way that information is used, which journalism tries to protect. And I think that's a perfectly valid position to take.
Well, you called this network, RT, an openly biased network. And I think you are totally right at that, because we here in Russia at RT in particular understand what informs our view of the world, and we are totally transparent about our own biases. Isn't the recognition of your own biases, your own perspective, and the limitations of your own perspective a bit more honest and ethical than just claiming objectivity and impartiality, which I think many of our Western colleagues do?
No, look, I think you're sort of seeking to use an important discussion about the quality of information to fit into a particular political point of view. The fact of the matter is that there have been many times in which Western media, or media owned by Western companies or attached to Western governments, have behaved badly, have been propagandistic. And, you know, the journalists and people who seek to support ethical journalism have been openly critical of them. Certainly I have. There's no question about that. But there's a difference here between sort of saying that because there's a political bias, we can move to one side and forget any notions of responsibility in the way that we use information. And I think that's a very dangerous thing.
I totally agree with you. But Mr. White, in all honesty, what's the proportion of those ethical, accountable journalists if we consider the whole field, especially if we are talking about international broadcasting? Can you name a single international network that is being totally ethical according to your own standard?
No, I can't, and I wouldn't try to do so, because I actually don't believe that our ethics are protected by the creation of notional league tables or beauty contests between groups and so on. I think the BBC has been good, but sometimes the BBC has been bad. I think that Russia Today has been good in some things it's done, but sometimes it has been bad. The fact of the matter is, all international networks, all national networks, all those that are dependent on government for funding, for example, or political groups for funding, are susceptible to pressure. And the fact is that journalists have to be vigilant in the protection of their values and their principles and their ethics in order to carry out their work. So I wouldn't say that I give a gold star to a particular channel or to a particular sort of group of journalists. That would be a mistake. What you always have to recognize is the need for vigilance. You have to protect the quality of journalism against manipulation to try to use journalism and media to satisfy political interests or particular cultural interests. And the worst thing of all, at times of war and conflict, to protect journalism from being openly used as instrument for war.
Well, I agree with you, but if we come back to, for example, RT or China's CCTV, Iran's Press TV, those channels are often called propaganda tools in the hands of their respective governments. And even if that's the case, if those channels indeed promote a certain political agenda, I wonder what's so awful about that. Isn't that ultimately contributing to the global marketplace of ideas and making it, a somewhat broader field, providing alternative points of view to, the dominant position that Western media have been occupying for quite some time?
I'm entirely in favour of pluralism of opinion. Everyone can have their own opinion, their own ideas and so on. It's possible for channels and journalists who believe very strongly in one thing. You can work for Fox News and take a very strong view about the Iraq war and how it should be fought, and Saddam Hussein. You can actually sort of support your government in what they're doing and so on. And you can do all sorts of things, and you can actually be as propagandistic as you want. And actually, I don't mind that, because I'm not against that. What I'm against is that being termed journalism, because it's not journalism. I'm in defense of something called journalism, which is quite distinct from propaganda. Journalism is an attempt, always under difficult circumstances, an attempt to actually have a public discourse on the basis of information which is reliable and is produced under professional conditions. That's extremely difficult, but I wouldn't abandon it in the way that you have and say, well, we can put that to one side and let us all do our own thing, and we can call it whatever we want. The fact of the matter is, I want to see journalism being produced with journalists who are courageous enough occasionally to challenge their government. Now, all of the networks you have mentioned, CCTV, Press TV, even RT, absolutely, they can be professional in their own eyes. But the evidence of whether or not they are being journalistic in their work is when they challenge their own government.
Well, but
is
Mr.
when
White,
they say things, they broadcast information which is challenging to their government and to the position of their
Mr.
government.
White,
and
I
that
think
very rarely happens.
Well, probably it does. I actually would agree with you, but I think many of those networks have a totally different purpose. They're not out to challenge that government. It's their government that pays for that. But what that government wants to achieve is a global marketplace of ideas. It wants to challenge the dominance of the Western narrative that is responsible for launching a number of wars and killing hundreds of thousands of people. And it may be self-serving to any particular government, but it's still serving the global good, the global public good.
Look, I'm absolutely agreeing with you about the need for, you could say that 15 to 20 years ago, the global narrative in the media system was dominated by an Anglo-Saxon view of the world. Essentially, it came from the BBC and the American big networks. Therefore, the introduction of a completely new sets of ideas, whether it's through Al Jazeera, whether it's through Press TV, whether it's through RT or CCTV, is absolutely great. It's very important because it creates a pluralistic landscape. But what we have to see within that is we have to encourage people to try to understand that there is a need for respect for some universal principles of how we communicate with one another, some universal values, and I think respect for facts, not demonizing the enemy, not inciting people to intense hatred and to violence. These, avoiding propaganda, these, it seems to me, are absolutely essential values. So let's have more voices, let's have much more pluralism, but let's also have a commitment within this, shall we say, big playground of different players, also have a commitment to ethics and to journalistic values.
What makes you think that all those journalists that work for CCTV, Russia Today, Press TV, or just as, like BBC or CNN, what makes you feel that they don't have that commitment to those very lofty values and standards that you just mentioned? They also go to war zones, they report from there, they risk their own lives. And at the end of the day, if I can make this point, at the end of the day, Mr. White, isn't that a way of actually keeping our governments in check? We are keeping the British government in check, the British journalists are keeping the Russian government in check.
But look, it's very good to hear what you've got to say, but actually I'd like to hear your questions at the end of this. And the point about it is this. You are quite right, these stations have a view of the world. They report from war zones. But very rarely do I hear these stations having critical voices about the strategies being used by their governments, about the decisions that are being taken by their governments. If you look at an organisation like the BBC, for example, the BBC has been absolutely criticised regularly by its government and by its heads of government for its failure, apparently, to take a governmental position. It was criticised over the coverage of Northern Ireland. It criticised the government and gave lots of space in it to run up to the Iraq war in the position that the British government was taking. Here was a station. I'm not saying that the BBC is the best model, but what I'm saying is that here are examples of a station which is seeking, although it's 100% government paid for, here is a station which is seeking to put before the whole of the public different points of view and perspectives. That is not something that you can say for RT or
Mr.
CCTV
White, I'm
Press
very,
TV.
very skeptical of that. And the reason I'm very skeptical of that is because I reported extensively from Syria. And I remember BBC reports from 3 years ago. Go and check them for yourself. They are all rosy and sappy and democracy inspired. And none of them mentions the threat of terrorism, which I think by now we have all recognized exists in Syria. Speaking about the impartiality of
this
BBC.
May be your experience in one conflict. I have been reporting and I have been visiting and I have been working in this area for 40 years. I've seen the situation in Northern Ireland. I've been to Bosnia. I've been to Iraq. I've seen the situation in Central America, in Colombia and elsewhere. I've seen the role that media play and have played. Very bad in some situations, but also in other situations, critical and good. So, I do know about this whole question of how media behave in wartime. And I think it's quite wrong to seek to sort of look at a particular reporting in a particular incident of a particular conflict. You have to look at it in the round. The fact of the matter is, you build public trust by good, honest reporting, which sometimes means you come into conflict with your government. And if you never come into conflict with your government, if you're never putting before your government an alternative position or a position that is reflected by others within even a minority opinion between...
I can see your point, but I think you're a very ardent defender of the BBC and their ethical standards and them sometimes being criticized by the government, but somehow that criticism didn't stop the Iraqi war and the Libyan campaign from being launched. But Mr. White, we have to stop this heated discussion for a very, very short break. But when we come back, propaganda is usually seen as an impediment to ethical journalism, but could it also be its main facilitator? Well, that's coming up in a few moments on Worlds Apart.
I'm Abby Martin. The stories we cover here, you're not going to hear anywhere else.
Another big story that mainstream headlines seem to have
There's a
missed.
reason they don't want you to know.
Nothing in the report detailing the reason.
We should all be completely outraged.
Now let's break the set.
Welcome back to Worlds Apart, where we are discussing journalism and propaganda with Aidan White, director of the Ethical Journalism Network. Mr. White, just before the break, you were talking about some of the networks, including RT, that rarely criticizes its own government. And I wonder if this proliferation of state-affiliated channels around the world actually creates a venue for keeping all those various governments in check. Because, I mean, I can concede the point that some people may feel constrained in criticizing their government, though I don't think that's the case for RT. But I think that, if Russian or Chinese journalists don't do that, we can always count on our American or British colleagues. So my point is that we can keep our respective governments in check, and that's a way of overcoming not only our cultural biases, but also self-censorship that sometimes comes into play here.
Look, I mean, I think self-censorship is a really dangerous phenomenon, and it's true. I mean, I think it exists, and it's far and away. You know, journalism is practiced by people who actually apply good editorial judgment. You know, you have to make a decision: do I use this film or that film, this headline or that headline? You take ethical decisions according to what you believe is the right thing. Now, when you start taking those decisions because you're afraid of the consequences, you're afraid of who might be upset if you use this story or this picture or that picture, then and you're afraid of the external response, then it becomes self-censorship.
But that wasn't my question. My question was about keeping each other governments in check. You know, whether you can rely on RT to keep the American government in check while the Russian government will be kept on its toes by, let's say, American or British journalists. What's wrong with that concept?
If I was a Russian citizen and I was having my taxpayers' money used to sort of support a TV station, I'd like to know that, my TV station is keeping my own government in check as well as other governments as well. I mean,
Mr. White, we are talking about international journalism, people and countries spending resources on informing public abroad. So every media outlet has its specific purpose. I mean, we don't cover everything. I mean, we do have our own specialization, all of us, around the media landscape. You cannot claim that every single channel, whether it's a morning show or, I don't know, a program for animals, about animals, should keep the government in check.
You cannot have, of course, you can't have every single show is always balanced, is always impartial. Of course, that's not the case. Journalism is not judged by a single segment of a single report or a single piece of film. It's judged on a process that is continuous. You judge it over a period of time. Clearly, balance comes in and impartiality comes over a bit of time. You might focus today on what your own government has got to say. You might focus tomorrow on what somebody else is saying, which may be contrary to that. And you may subject both of them to proper contextual analysis. That's good journalism. So what I'm getting at here is that I disagree with the philosophy that says that because we are paid for by Russia, or we're paid for by Iran, or we're paid for out of London by the British government, it's our duty, therefore, not to question what our government is doing, but only to question what other governments are doing. And I think that's an abdication of journalistic responsibility. Journalists have to take information and report it in context. And that context is provided both nationally and internationally. And so therefore good journalism, ethical journalism, will always have in mind what other points of view that exist. That's the whole notion of having a recognition that there is more than one side to a story, that there are very often two sides or three sides to a story.
Well,
and good journalists are engaged
Mr. White,
in telling
let's
all
not
sides
abuse
of the
each other
story.
with the basics of journalism. I mean, like, I realize that you may not have a very high opinion of me or this channel, but believe me, we also went to J schools, and we know the basics. I think it's a very, a somewhat arrogant Western position of looking down on people who don't come from established media sources as, somehow not journalistic enough. I mean, come on.
I think you're being unfair there. I absolutely respect, my colleagues at Press TV, my colleagues at CCTV. I know some of them, I've worked with them, and I know they're highly skilled and so on. But I'm talking about journalism as a whole. Journalism is a sort of a very important part of the international framework for good, honest discourse, public discourse and use of information. And when I go back to basics, and I go back to basics all of the time when I'm talking about ethical journalism, because I think you need to. In the world of the internet, when the open information landscape apparently gives everybody free license to say what the hell they want whenever they want it, it's very important to be able to have some sort of basic understanding that there should be some ethical notions at work when we use information. So that whole question of accuracy, no incitement to hatred, no demonizing of opposition and so on, are important principles.
You just mentioned demonizing the other side, and I mentioned that I reported extensively from Syria and also Libya, and I remember that the Assad or Gaddafi governments weren't really given a fair say in the coverage, in the Western coverage of those conflicts, which brings me to the question of propaganda. The word propaganda acquired its negative connotations in the early 20th century when some totalitarian regimes, the Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, resorted to distorting facts and spreading total falsehoods. And I think in this environment, in the current media environment, catching somebody telling lies is very easy. I mean, nobody does it. What we disagree about is how to interpret those various facts and how to place them with our picture of the world. And I wonder if allegations of propaganda also represent a form of propaganda, because what you do is essentially delegitimizing the source without looking at the context, without looking at the substance of the information that source presents.
No, I mean, but I absolutely agree with that. I think propaganda, it has to be understood. It's a concept which is very, very important. It reflects a bias. I don't think a bias is problematic. I think it becomes a problem if you are absolutely seeking to sort of create an entirely false image. I'll give you an example. During the Ukraine crisis, Western media tended to sort of give the impression that Yanukovych was corrupt, that basically the people who were, seeking to have him kicked out were young activists and all Democrats. This seemed to be an impression that was given. In my view, this didn't have proper context, because, of course, it wasn't as simple as that. The relationship between Russia and Ukraine is complex and historically complex. The relationship between Russia and Ukraine and Europe, which they're part of, is also historically complex. And you have to sort of report these matters in an adult and mature manner. I don't think they were reported in an adult and mature manner. I think there was a real sort of problem. I think that political currents came into play which distorted the reporting of the Ukraine crisis, and I think to a certain extent continue to do so. So I think there's a real problem here, and I'm not blaming one side, either in Kiev or in Moscow. I'm basically sort of saying the whole of the reporting has been flawed, and I think there's a need for, therefore, to have a proper discussion about it. That's why we're working with the European Federation of Journalists and the OSCE to promote a dialogue between Ukraine journalists and Russian journalists to discuss that whole question about how this information is being used. And I think that sort of dialogue is extremely important because it helps to get journalism, as it should be, back on track.
Mr. White, I do appreciate what you do for Russian and Ukrainian reporters, but I wonder if you could do the same thing for Western reporters, because, as you just pointed out, this depiction of any public protest as a democracy uprising is very prevalent in the Western media landscape, and I think it's maybe well-intentioned. I mean, I don't think people purposefully want to distort what was happening in Libya or in Syria or in some other Arab countries. But I was there on the ground, and I know that, for example, in Benghazi, there weren't just peaceful protests. There were people who were hanging policemen on a lamppost. In Syria, from the very beginning, there were people who were assassinating police officers and army officers, and yet we didn't get the mention of that in Western media. So I wonder if the Western journalists are also involved in a massive propaganda effort without even realizing that they are.
I mean, I think there's a danger always of all journalists being sort of recruited as foot soldiers for a political line and a mainstream opinion, and to support assumptions that governments and political leaders would like to make. And I think Western media are guilty of that as much as any others. But I should tell you, I spend a lot of my time talking to Western journalists. I spend a lot of my time talking to the sort of people you're accusing of being propagandists, and I talk to them precisely about the issues that we've got before us today. And that is the dangers to ethical journalism in being drawn into a sort of particular political current and following that point of view. So, I mean, I don't come to talk to you basically as a symbolic and vocal representative of only Western journalistic values. I do not do that, because actually I don't believe in that. I believe in some notion of journalism which maybe you may think is idealistic and unrealistic, but actually I believe in a notion of human discourse in which people should communicate with each other honestly and reliably, and do so in such a manner as not to deliberately create fear or hatred. And it seems to me that's not unreasonable.
In one of your public speeches, I heard you say that when it comes to real important things like war or a major crisis, this is when people turn to journalism. This is where the need for reliable information is the highest. And rather than turning to social media or the internet. And I wonder if it's actually the other way around, that at a time of war, at a time when many geopolitical actors are involved, that people should be least trustful of journalists and most skeptical of media.
Well, no. I mean, I think people, when there is anxiety and uncertainty and the threat of war, people naturally want to get the most reliable information possible. If you actually look at the trusted brands on the internet for news and information, it's almost all traditional news media. It's not Twitter, it's not Facebook that actually provides the benchmark for reliability and trust in news and information through the internet. It is in fact traditional media. So people do recognize that people like yourself and others who are trained, who are professionals, who have thought about the importance of communication, about their relationship with their public and their audience, are very important people to go to at times of crisis and so on. I think this is absolutely right. And that's why it's at times of crisis where journalists have to be most vigilant. They have to be most jealous of their professional independence and their professional values, and they have to be most resistant to the pressure that there is to sort of follow a particular political line. So, you know, absolutely I think that that's right. And I think if you look at the conflicts that we have got breaking out today, the continuing sort of problems in the Middle East, the difficulties that are being felt in Egypt, the situation that exists in Ukraine and Russia, you know, here are cases where people are crying out for importantly, reliable and trustworthy information. And who's going to provide it? It's not going to be provided by this sort of government political spin machines. It's got to be provided by journalists. That's why my network is fighting very, very strongly for the status of journalists to be enhanced and the quality of our journalism to improve.
Well, Mr. White, unfortunately, we don't have any time left for another debate, so we have to leave it here. I really appreciate you being on the show, and to our viewers, chime in with your views and comment on our Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook pages, and I hope to see you again, same place, same time, here on Worlds Apart.